everyone. Welcome to the session today. We're so glad you're here with us, and we're looking forward to an incredible conversation with this amazing panel. We're going to get into some of the key things that you all can do to enable, support, and serve a global workforce, how to get the best out of them, and how to support them in a really powerful sort of way. So I'm really excited to have this group of panelists here with us. We have Addie Johnsen. She is the Chief People Officer for Aperian, and she is passionate about creating workplaces where people feel like they belong and can do their very best work. And so we'll hear some more from Addie on that topic in a little bit. We have Jerry here from the team at Multiplier. He's the SVP of People and Culture. And Jerry's going to talk about things like how to create a culture where we can connect our talent to the real business problems and create a spark of genius. It's going to be really incredible. And then lastly, we have Lauren Rollins here. She's the leader over at Alchemy Technologies around talent development. So she's going to really lean in on some of those things we can do to help our people be more curious and help drive better outcomes when it comes to developing them and growing their skills. So each of these leaders is going to be chiming in today. I'm so glad all of you are here. And really quickly for the audience out there, this session today, we're going to get into things like how to support the cultural differences that your people have at a global scale. We all know there are different cultures around the world, but it becomes very real when that's inserted into a workplace context. How do you manage and support people with different views, perspectives, different opinions on things, or even different ways of doing work? We're going to look at some of the more technical things like time zone challenges and issues that all of us have probably faced a little bit of struggle with at some point or another. And then things like technology. How does that fit into this equation? What problems can it solve for us? And how do we think about that in a strategic sort of way? So a couple of data points really quickly just to help you think about this. One of the things that we see in the research we've done at Lighthouse is that organizations that have a global presence tell us that the biggest challenge they have when it comes to managing a global workforce is really getting them connected in, onboarding, culture, really helping them get into the organization. So we may be able to hire them, but how do we start connecting them? So it really ties in well with some of the things we're going to talk about today. So I did not do my quick intro, but I am Ben Eubanks, the Chief Research Officer for Lighthouse Research and Advisory. And it's my job to take the data that we collect and make things very, very simple and easy to understand for all of our friends out there like you who are doing the hard work of HR and talent development every single day. So we're going to get into this good conversation, have some fun, learn some things, and really give you all some good practical takeaways that you can go away with to create a better global interaction with your people and to get to the best out of your teams. So to start off, Jerry, I'm going to kick this over to you just to start us off. And I'd love to hear from you. What do you think are some of the technical challenges that prevent companies from pursuing this idea of managing a global workforce? I know that you've worked in multiple organizations where you've done this and built these teams out. I'd love to hear your side on that from the technical perspective.
So Ben, here's how I actually look at it. Imagine a bunch of business leaders coming together and they have clearly aligned and agreed that there is a massive market opportunity, right? Mm-hmm. There is a massive market opportunity to be explored. And then they start planning for it. How ridiculous it would be if that entire discussion comes and stalls at how do we engage people in another country where we do not have an entity, right? That will look so stupid. I think that is today one of the challenges. I wouldn't say it's a challenge. I think it's a block that HR as well as finance would probably run into. Talent is available everywhere. And I think all of us have seen life enough and adequate to know that the finest talent is available anywhere in this world. It's just that we may not have access to it. Once you create that access, if you have talent available where you do not have an entity, how do you engage that talent? I think that is where that entire discussion of growing a business comes and stalls. The compliance matters are probably the biggest hurdle any of the HR or finance people run into. The visa issues, the payroll matters, the deductions, the taxation, the visas, immigration, benefits, insurance, all of that put together becomes such a humongous problem that there aren't many people who would have the bandwidth and the inclination to even start solving those problems, right? And come to think of it, right? We've lived very hectic days. All of us have very packed schedules. In those schedules, who in this HR function would have the time to go and find answers for taxation, insurance, benefits, infrastructure, connectivity, and stuff like that? I think today if there is one thing that is stopping the world from growing economically, socially, politically, I think it's the ability to hire and engage people without borders, across borders. I think, Ben, I would also kind of launch what we do there, right? As Multiplier, we actually come in there and solve problems, solutions. So finance would be the first team that will come and ask us, okay, so how do we engage people in, say, Vietnam, right, where we do not have an entity? And we come back and say, you don't have to open an entity. Otherwise, imagine the challenge that finance runs into. Opening an entity, registrations, quarterly, periodic, half-yearly, annual submissions. And then you need to have somebody stationed there, right? And all of that without any assurance that the business will actually grow. That's where Multiplier comes into the picture. And we say, you don't need to open an entity. We have entities in 150 plus countries. And that provides the finance as well as the people organization a huge assurance. So they go ahead and look for the talent. They then come back to us, right? And then we create that entire 360 of that solution. We go ahead and take care of the taxation. And trust me, the finance function heaves a sigh of relief. We go ahead and ensure that your periodic submissions are completed. And we provide 100% assurance. That's when the CFO comes up and says, we rely on you, or we trust on you more than we probably trust on our own teams. And that is when the HR guy steps up, collaborates with the business leaders, and then helps grow talent in those new places that we have identified. So in my mind, man, I think compliance is probably the biggest hurdle. If people come back and tell me there is no market available, I wouldn't believe it. Because I think there is market for just about any viable, meaningful solution. If somebody comes and says there is no people available, I'll go and tell there is talent available. But what is lacking is the ability to engage people across the world without borders in a very compliant, very secure, and a very assured manner.
I would agree with that. As my own experience has shown me as an HR leader, one of the things that we struggled with was, even if you feel like you've got your compliance things buttoned up, you're good and squared away there, if you add something new, something different, you always feel like there's this nagging, what do we not know? What are we not aware of? What sort of thing could sneak up behind us because we just don't know what we don't know? And so that's the real, I believe that's the real challenge there. And that if you don't have a partner there, you don't have the right organization working alongside you, who is trusted, who knows the lay of the land, that increases your risk, that increases your chances of potentially failing in that area, in that endeavor from the business perspective. So all those things do create real risks there. So Addie, I'd love to hear from you. There are other risks as well, not just on the compliance side, but also in how we treat and manage and support a diverse workforce, because we all know that even within one country, the workforce is very diverse. But when you start getting to other cultures, other areas of the world, that creates some different levels of difficulty. Would you talk about that for a moment?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks so much, Jerry, for starting us off. We ourselves are a global company working across multiple borders and rely on valuable support from partners like you in order to make it work and to have a really talented global workforce. Fortunately, we have some really great research and data to back up that just having a global workforce isn't actually enough. You have to be able to leverage the differences that we have. So how do we take this wonderful, diverse, talented pool? How do we leverage those similarities? How do we capture all that diverse brain power and how we're approaching problems and solutions and ideas? There's some really great research out there from Nancy Adler is one, where she describes diverse organizations that have a lot of diversity. They either are on the lower performing end or they're in the highest performing end. There's not much in the middle. And the difference between the lowest performing diverse organizations and the highest is the amount of inclusion that you have at your organization. Are you effectively managing across different work styles? Do you have culturally agile managers that are able to understand their own work style, those that they're working with, and really have an environment where folks can be the best version of themselves, bring in their talents, they feel safe to contribute ideas and take risks, So that ability to navigate these cultural differences, these work style differences in an inclusive manner, that's what's going to be the difference between being on that lower end and being in that higher end.
So that creates a different level of risk, right? That creates a very real people risk when it comes to their ability to do their work, when it comes to their ability to feel safe and feel like they can focus on things. There's a story I love to tell that ties into this, Addie. Years ago, had a manager or had one of our instructor pilots working on our teams, and he was coaching and instructing in different aircraft, and he had a Jordanian pilot join him one day. And so they go up in the air, says, okay, we're going to simulate an engine failure, and he turns the engine off in the air. And instead of grabbing the controls, the student who he's instructed, this Jordanian pilot, reaches down and starts untying his boots. He's like, what is going on here? So he like takes control back, gets him to the ground safely, and starts chewing him out. Like, what are you doing? He said, listen, my religion says I cannot be wearing shoes if I'm going to die. So I have to take my shoes off if this thing's going to crash. It's like, okay, we'll get to that in a minute, but like, here's what we're going to do to actually respond to this problem. But he said, I never stopped to think about how his beliefs at a religious level would change how he affected, like how he viewed the job, the workflow, the procedures, all those sorts of things on a day-to-day basis. So those sorts of things that you're saying, like not knowing something big or something even that we would consider small, just a small interaction culturally could change how the interaction goes entirely, it sounds like.
And that can show up in your day-to-day interactions. Like you said, Ben, it can show up in team meetings, how you're making decisions. You may have a team leader with a very independent work style, for example, likes to get things done on their own, but their team may be functioning and preferring to work in a way that's more group-oriented, more interdependent. They're expecting to engage in conversations and decision-making together, but that's not what the manager is expecting. There may be a decision-making process in place that has different attitudes towards risk, and you have a culture that might be more certainty-oriented or more risk-averse, and so they want to engage and need to engage in more thoughtful fact-finding and research before reaching a decision. And there's going to be some inherent conflict if other team members or their manager is ready to make a decision and move on. So starting with your managers and really all individuals in our global organizations having a framework, having a shared language where they can start to talk about some of these work style preferences, that's going to set them up for success. At Aperian, we do use our Glow Smart profile as a starting off place. But again, to have everyone in your organization have that starting level of awareness. Who am I? What are my preferred ways of working? What might be some of my biases that I'm bringing into working different ways? And understanding about their team members, what's most important to them, what are their preferred work styles, and then needing to develop some skills, especially as a team manager, on how we're going to bridge some of those differences, but also leverage the similarities as well. So really starting with that self-awareness that culture is making a difference here, and what are some practical ways to bridge those differences.
Thank you so much, Addie. So Lauren, I think Addie just used the phrase that you and I both like thrills our hearts. She said, develop some skills, right? We've got to get these people thinking about and changing their behaviors and not just knowing the thing to do, but actually doing the thing they're supposed to do. And so you come at this from a talent development perspective. We've heard about compliance. We've heard about some of the culture pieces. What other sorts of unique challenges do you think global organizations face that the audience needs to be thinking about here?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I don't necessarily think that Akamai is unique in the challenges that we face. But, post-COVID, we think about the flexibility to work, across the globe, work from home, work from a coffee shop, which is fantastic, but it also brings with it its own challenges. So at Akamai, we hear consistently that time is a challenge. So we've really worked recently to create more of the nanobytes, the just-in-time learning, so that our leaders and our employees can immediately apply what they've learned. And we've seen amazing benefits from that. But the second challenge that I think is not unique to Akamai, here Jerry and Addie talk about it, but is this global workforce that we have and the challenge of working across multiple time zones. So we encourage our leaders to vary the start times for some of their meetings to accommodate our global workforce. We encourage them to be really clear about setting expectations with their team around, when are you working? When are you off hours? So we're not blurring those lines. We also ask them to be clear about the communication tools and applications and systems that they use so that they're speaking a consistent language. If you prefer to speak on WebEx Teams for a quick chat, if you prefer a more formal email, and similar to Addie, we leverage the GlobeSmart profile internally, which really helps our leaders communicate with their teams around certain preferences and styles that they prefer to use on a daily basis. Now, that doesn't always happen. It isn't a perfect world. We can't start, every meeting at 5 a.m. or 10 p.m. to accommodate our global workforce, but we try and work within, the tools that we're given to empower our employees to do their best work.
Mm-hmm. So that empower, the word you use, empower there, one of the things that we see in the research is when we ask workers what flexibility means to them, only sometimes does it mean where I work. Many times it's when, as you talked about the when, the scheduling piece and how we fit that piece together, but it's also the how. Do I have any autonomy? Do I have any control over some of these things? And I think that fits into this bigger conversation we've had already with our other panelists here around some of the culture pieces and stuff, being able to give some flexibility. So if I prefer a group, or I prefer a one-on-one, or I prefer like this different types of interactions, we're able to give them some of those sorts of things because that meets a fundamental need that our people have to do their best work, is to feel like they have some autonomy, some flexibility in their work. That matters on so many different levels.
And I would just add to that too, the communication is key. And we try to stress that with our leaders and with our employees, because if you're not vocal about the how you like to be communicated to or the when, it can lead to some challenges and to some miscommunication because folks just aren't aware of those preferences and those styles. So having those conversations early on when a new team member joins the team, if there's a reorganization within the group, to say, here are my work style preferences. So doing the GlobeSmart profile to align and talk about similarities, but more importantly, the differences. So how can you bridge some of those gaps and work together to avoid some miscommunications down the road?
Yeah, excellent, excellent. So I did not offer this at the beginning for the audience out there, but if you're watching this and you're thinking, I'm curious about that comment that Jerry made, or I want to know more about that approach that Addie's taking, or I want to know more about how Lauren's company is approaching. If you want a question for one of those panelists, or you want to know more about some of these bigger ideas, please drop that into the chat. We'd be glad to make sure and try to address those. But we want you all to feel like participants in this. We'll have some polls towards the end, but for the moment, feel free to ask questions, chime in the chat, just be engaged here, because as you've heard from our other panelists, they're not the only companies, and they freely admit that are dealing with some of these bigger challenges, and each of us can learn from each other as part of this. So we're going to kick over a little bit. We've talked about some of the big problems and challenges, and if we stopped right here, we'd be doing a disservice to all of our friends out here listening in. So let's talk about some solutions, some ideas, some things we can do about that, ways we can approach it, hopefully give them some practical takeaways that they can use as they're going back to work after they finish this session today, and get back into how to do this maybe a little smarter, a little better, with some bigger ideas or a general awareness overall. So Lauren, I'm going to start with you here on this one. What very specifically here, we're going like right to it. What are some best practices or ideas for collaborating across time zones? You talked about like shifting meeting scheduling times around. I think that's a great one because it shows respect for everyone who's going to be dialing in to the degree that you can. What are some other things that you could throw in there that might be helpful for everyone listening in that's trying to manage that day to day?
Yeah, it's a great question. And again, there's no silver bullet. There's not going to be a magic wand that we can wave, and solve everybody's challenges. But as I said, with being really clear about expectations, that is really, really important. And the communication aspect is key. We do encourage our employees to use similar tools. So if you're on a project management team and there is a tool tracker that you use to keep track of your tasks, we recommend that you all use a consistent tool so that when you're checking notes, if you're working in India and I'm in Boston, I can go during the night in India, check out that tool to make sure that I have the latest and greatest information. We recommend installing things like the time zone converter, so you can easily check and see when your colleagues are working, when they might be off hours. Things like moving the clocks back, which we just did here in Boston, that you might not be top of mind depending on where in the world you work from. And then one thing that we do internally too is we have an internal website that provides consistent resources to all of our team members across the globe so that they are speaking a common language in terms of those tools and those systems that they use so that they can empower their employees to do their best work. So those are a few tidbits that I can offer in terms of some global approaches.
Tremendous. So, Jerry, we heard some of those things there from Lauren around some of the practices, the strategies, things like that. But we also know that each of our individual people we're trying to bring on board, we need them to have some soft skills that they're able to do some miscommunication, some misconnection, to be able to support and engage with each other, often long distance. So what are some of the things that you look for when you're thinking about hiring to support the Multiplier team there when it comes to a global workforce? What soft skills really matter?
Awesome. A very important and a very relevant question, Ben. But I also, before I start answering the question, I just want to let you guys know I'm actually enjoying this discussion. I'm walking away so much more aware and enriched. That said, I think a global workforce needs management by design. Like you have to plan every single move. While we were working in office, you may not have had the need, you may not have felt the need to plan, to bring people together, to help them engage, to help them grow and innovate together. But in remote, you have to do it by design. You can't leave it for default. First, I think, is communication. And I'll give you this example, right? Managing a global workforce, Ben, is like going on a war. Like imagine you have your soldiers on the ground, you have your Navy personnel in the waters, and you have your Air Force in the air. And all the three have to work in tandem to deliver a message or conquer a country, to get their objective done. Imagine what would happen if there is no communication or if there is no instant, meaningful exchange of information, right? Now replicate that in an organization. We feel the need for the Air Force, the Navy, and the Army to coordinate and move forward towards their targets. We probably miss out that opportunity to replicate a similar sense of urgency and the need when you are running an organization. As Lauren said, right? People across nearly every time zone, right? As Addie said, building solutions to help people realize their potential. Now, at the base of it is communication. And I have run into those similar problems. You have 6 team members, one in the US, one in UK, one in Philippines, a bunch of them in India, and all of them in the recruitment team, and trying to hire the best talent across geographies, across cultures. I believe, and I'm very, very convinced that communication is the mood. You need to let people know why are you doing what you're doing. Else, in remote, it becomes a very transactional engagement. Like I will come, deliver 10 units of work, and I will disappear. I will have no affiliation with an organization, right? So with communication, you help them understand the purpose of why you are where you are, why you are doing what you are doing. You help them understand how their actions will help deliver on the organizational mission. And 3 is it needs a constant reminder to individuals every morning if it need be. I won't call it micromanagement, but I'll call it creating a regular alignment to our purpose, right? Otherwise, in remote, I'll give this example. When you come to office, there is the office experience. There is the office vibe that I associate myself with. Beyond that primary association with Multiplier, I will have multiple other affiliations, right? I will have affiliations with people who come from my state, the place where I come from, people who speak my language, people who have been educated in my institute, people who follow the religion that I follow. So there are multiple other affiliations, which are small threads that build a stronger connect around the primary identity, which is my organization. In remote, I am like a loose iron. I am like floating around in the air, and I will get attracted to anything that happens, be it a competitor, right? So unless I communicate well, I am not able to build that affinity, that affiliation or identity with the company. Second, in remote, we need to have people who can manage ambiguity and complexity, both. Like, it's a part of your life. Even if you are in the finance accounting function, doing accounts payables or receivables, which is the most standard operating procedure driven activity, you will still need to work with ambiguity and the complexity involved, right? And finally, I would say you need to have individuals who have that intent, right? The intent to solve problems. Otherwise, uh, you might run into a situation, you may not realize it's a problem, but it could be a very deep inherent problem to creating a better ecosystem. So have people who are able to identify a problem and solve a problem. And I'll give this example. When I joined Multiplier, I realized we had something called a remote working reimbursement, right? And we didn't have a policy. Anybody who joined in could buy a monitor, a keyboard, a mouse, or whatever to help drive productivity and wellness. And anybody who joined would send a one-liner mail to HR and say, I want to buy a monitor. Can you please approve? And we used to approve that. Imagine two individuals spending 3.5 minutes writing that mail and approving that mail. Instead of that, you would create a policy and put it up there. That's the problem that we wanted to solve. Created a policy, gave it in the new joiners handbook. So people didn't have the need to ask a question, to write an additional mail. So communication is the key. Having people who can manage ambiguity and work with complexity is the second one. And 3 is the most important, I would say, is the ability to solve problems. I think those are the 3 that we need to have in a remote ecosystem. Ben, all yours.
One of the things you said a minute ago struck me because you talked about people that want to have an impact. We're not just trying to get just anyone to join our companies. We're trying to get the ones that are like bought into the mission. They're sold out on what vision we have for success and how we're going to serve clients and how we're going to all these sorts of things. And one of the things we saw in some research recently, we did a sort of experimentation with candidates out there on a global scale. And we gave them different job ads that they could select from. And the only difference in the job ads was how we talked about the company. And one, we talked about, well, we're a leader in such and such industry. The other one, we said, we deliver safe food to families around the world. And the only difference there was that little statement. And the one that looked at impact over industry, candidates preferred that twice as often. So we're looking for those people who are high impact, who are really excited. And they're also looking for companies where they can make an impact when we give them a chance to do that. So Addie, I know I've got a question for you specifically around some of the things that you're passionate around, but I want to follow up on some of the things that Jerry said here. Anything else you would add in on the soft skills side? Anything that you think is critical for managers to have, or critical for leaders to have in the business, or even for the individuals to have to help them operate successfully in this sort of remote environment?
Right. And thank you, Jerry and Lauren, too, for adding all your really great ideas. And I want to support with adding a few more as well. We talk so much historically about skills that are emotional in nature, that are people-centered as being soft skills. And I'm so pleased that the conversation is shifting a bit and away from soft skills, that they're in fact power skills and critical skills. And you use that language too, Ben, it's critical. So I think shifting that these aren't just nice to haves anymore. It really is. You have to be able to have the ability to understand yourself and have that curiosity, that desire to bridge with someone who might be different. These are skills that anyone can develop. You of course need a framework and support in which to do that. But these are critical. You can't not have them in today's global environment. Yes, Jerry, you mentioned quite a bit about the need for folks to have that shared mission, to know why we're showing up, especially if you're sitting at your desk and you could be working anywhere. There's really no, global branding necessarily around you. So how can you have folks feel connected and passionate about the work that we're doing if you're not physically sitting with your team. So that work of really having clear mission, vision, and values across your organization, and not just having it be something that looks really nice on a website and for sure during a job posting and in your job description, but something that takes really intentional, deep work, starting with your recruitment process and through all stages of the life cycle. And these critical skills of cultural agility also touch upon every stage of that life cycle as well. You mentioned flexibility, right? And understanding what flexibility looks like and what folks in the research that you've done at Lighthouse been, that really ties into all aspects of how we work together, assuming that folks want to hear news the same way and they want to develop relationships the same way, really leaning in with that curiosity of, well, how do you like to communicate? How do you want to raise ideas? What feels safe and productive for you? And having managers, with some tools on how to do that and how to model that, that's really going to help the organization be aligned culturally and enable folks to feel more engaged in that they can be themselves at work and do their best work. So some practical ways for managers and really all team members to do that is for sure taking those few extra minutes to build some relationship with folks. As a team leader, of course, group meetings will be part of that, but making sure you're also doing one-on-one connections with your team members. If you are expecting to make a lot of decisions, maybe having a little bit more time ahead of that big conversation to get people's input and ideas, because they may not feel comfortable raising that in a group setting. So ensuring that your managers know, I need to really get to know my team members and understand their motivations, that they're bought into the big picture, and how I can, in a group setting, enable them to feel safe and productive. So that tool set that we need folks to have and understanding their team is so important. There's, of course, so many other examples of behaviors. And Lauren, you mentioned some great ones too about time zones, being mindful of that. Another idea too could be doing watch parties as an example. We've experimented that with a bit at Aperian, where maybe that company call or that big team meeting isn't happening in your time zone this time, but host a watch party in your own time zone with ideally a local management member that can be there to take questions. So at least you're watching a recording together. It's not just going to your list of recordings you haven't had time to get to yet. But finding ways to be creative in meeting people where they're at globally so that they don't feel they're getting news or changes secondhand, thirdhand. They're the last ones to know. How can you be creative with that communication in a way that's going to be most meaningful and impactful for them?
I talked to an HR or a talent VP recently, and one of the things she was telling me is when people come into their organization, regardless where they are in the world, they do a quick, what they call a me manual. It's basically a user guide to working with me, all those things that I wish I'd known about working with Addie or working with Lauren or working with Jerry that you find out after 6 months or a year or longer. It'd be great to put those things down so they understand, hey, here's how I show up best to a meeting. Here's when I prefer to do my creative thinking. If you want to brainstorm something, don't hit me at 7:30 in the morning. It's not going to work out well for you. Let's do this after lunch because I'll be able to more fully focus. And putting those things down, they ask their new people to do that. So when they're engaging with and building relationships, they're putting some of those things out there into the world that people can know about them and not have to just guess or try to figure out over time through trial and error. So I'm with you on that. Those skills matter. How we think about those things matter. And we can create this both organizational culture as well as a team culture where people are not afraid to say, hey, I've got an idea, or I want to chime in, or let me jump in on this team because I want to contribute here, because we're enabling them to do all those sorts of things. That's tremendous. I've got to jump over to Jerry really quickly, but really quick, Lauren, a minute or two, anything you want to kick in there to add into this conversation? I think it's a really rich one around skills that people need to be effective in a global workplace. Again, you're thinking about talent development broadly. Anything you throw in there as here's a double down on something that's been shared, or another thing that hasn't been mentioned yet you think is important for the audience to know?
Yeah, thanks so much. I was actually trying to come off of mute because so much of what Jerry and Addie and you, Ben, are saying is resonating. And like Jerry and Addie, yeah, I love the conversation because I mean, one, so often I think we feel like sometimes we're experiencing challenges either in a silo or on our own. But when you meet with other leaders, you find that the challenges you're experiencing are not unique to just you. So when Jerry was talking about, the communication, and I talked about communication, that being key. I love the me manual too. We don't do that, but that's perhaps something we should implement because it can, prevent so many challenges or miscommunication or conversations down the line from happening. But one thing that has become more and more relevant for us at Akamai, through COVID, post-COVID, since we are working so globally and across multiple time zones, is this idea of connection. And Jerry, you started to touch upon connection too, and Addie, and I think connection means different things to different people. So we actually built a connection profile or an assessment where folks can go through, answer a series of questions and receive some results to understand, the connection they feel with their manager, to understand the connection they feel with Akamai's culture, to understand the connection with their team and with the company. Because as I said, it means different things to different people, and there is no right or wrong. But what I feel in connection might be something different for Addie than it is for you, Ben, or you, Jerry. So understanding, what motivates you, how you feel connected, and how you can better engage with your teammates, with your leader, and with the company to really enable them to do their jobs better or to, meet the goals of the organization, our mission critical goals year over year. And I think the sooner we do that, the sooner we can thrive as an individual and as an organization. And again, it doesn't mean that there's a right or a wrong, but it's just understanding what motivates you and how you feel connected and what that connectedness means to you, so that you can foster better relationships, so you can bridge some of those gaps that maybe you have with some of your colleagues across the globe. And something else that we offer at Akamai in partnership with the Neuro Leadership Institute is the GROW program. So it's really operating with a growth mindset and making sure everybody's voice is heard, that we're including folks in the conversation, and that as individuals, the most recent module we've offered is called Evolve, to make sure that we are constantly evolving as individuals, as an organization, because what brought us here is not going to keep us here. So ensuring that we're having conversations like these to understand what companies are doing to foster and fuel themselves for the future to enable us to be the best that we can.
Oh, goodness, I love that.
What?
I love it.
Brilliant.
That's exciting. Goodness. Okay. So we're all applauding each other's conversations here and comments here. So I'm going to come back to you, Jerry. You'll get some applause from Lauren and Addie, no doubt. But you mentioned a little bit ago, you talked about an example of a policy around, supporting people that are working remotely. What other sorts of policies and structure do you think the audience can use? We're talking about some of the big picture ideas, some ways to make people feel, which are tremendous and valuable. But let's add a little structure to that. So what are some policies you think are important for people to put in place to help them get the most out of and support their global workforce?
So again, thank you, Ben. So here's how I look at creating a people function for a truly global organization, right? I think one needs to start with creating a very clear view of what we are hiring for, how are we hiring those people, and what are we looking for in those individuals. Now, in remote or in a global workforce, Ben, and I keep giving examples, bear with me. Some of them might stick and some of them may not. But it's like handing over a Bible to 10 individuals who work in different time zones, different countries, and hoping that they will understand what's written there, right? That is what organizations end up doing, creating a policy, communicating it once to managers, and then hoping and praying that they are using it appropriately. Won't work, right? Unless you create those policies, which are basically, first and foremost, one-touch policies. Like it could be something very, very tactical. Trust me when I say this. But anything that we create, any content, any policy, I tell my teams, create something that is available on one screen. So when somebody is standing at a red light on the road, the person should be able to read it on the mobile without using the second hand or any other finger. the person will consume and register. That's one. Two, as I was saying, and on specifics, how you hire is one. Two, how you onboard a global workforce, right? When you're building a global organization, your job doesn't end by just hiring individuals. That onboarding, and there is a fallacy, I would say, when people say the day one onboarding is when we need to invest. Trust me, I've been at Multiplier 9 months, I'm still onboarding, right? How do you create a very intense, engaging onboarding? Three, an individual needs to be enabled and empowered. I think Lauren mentioned that, right? Creating that empowerment so that at any different time zone, when you are engaging with a customer, you need to have an answer. So creating frameworks. In my case, very recently, what we have done is, this is the first time that we launched our performance management program. We've just been about 4 years old. So when we were creating the performance management program, we wanted the entire energy to be focused on that one transaction or interaction that happens in an organization every day, that engagement between the manager and the employee. We wanted to create a very nice, very beautiful, a less traumatic engagement between the manager and the employee. Like culturally, that engagement creates very different experiences. In some countries, that engagement creates acidity and trauma for the manager as well as the employee, right? But we wanted to create a very meaningful engagement. So we refreshed the approach. We only spoke about providing feedback for development, right? We created the performance management programs built completely around sharing of feedback. Second, today as we speak, we have customers in 104 countries, but we have employees in 32 countries, right? We have people in Latin America, we have people in Europe, we have people all over APAC and the Americas. Now, getting people to interact and feel like they belong to this place is easier said than done. Like, we come together on calls, we wish them well, we ask them what's happening, we ask them if they are well. It doesn't stop there. It shouldn't stop there. It should go a little deeper. My actions should convince Lauren and Addie and Ben that I am truly valuing your presence in my team. That inclusivity. Like, I had managers in one of my previous companies who came up and said, I think I'm a fairly inclusive and diverse leader. I said, how? The person said, I have people in 6 countries and I work across 6 time zones. I said, and then he had nothing more to say, right? When I talk about inclusivity, I look at that as an opportunity to not only have people, capabilities, talent with me, it's also an opportunity to create a truly meaningful workforce, right? And third is, how do you internally create your ecosystem to support a global workforce? Most organizations, right, would be very automated. The policies, processes will be in place, but they are all there to manage customers. What about our employees? Are we paying the same amount of attention and affection to our employees as we do to our customers? Our customers give us revenue, but that revenue comes from my people. If I make them feel well, if I help them solve their problems, then they are mine. If I win their heart, they will lead me to revenue and growth. So our entire effort or investment to create an ecosystem is centered around creating policies that support and enable and empower a global workforce. We also talk about building a very inclusive ecosystem. And finally, you focus on building a very engaged set of employees who feel happy being with us. Ben, yes.
I want to applaud after that one. It's my turn to do that. Like mic drop moments. People who are actually happy with that. I enjoy that so much. Love getting the inputs there, Jerry, on that. And I've some good takeaways, right? You mentioned fully valuing someone's presence and things like that. I think there's some really good takeaways just from that piece alone. But one of the things when you mentioned the story there a moment ago about the manager with multiple people, I was watching Addie's face. And she couldn't hold it back. She kind of yeah, that's not really the sense of inclusion there. Addie, what were you thinking when you heard that? And what advice would you have given a manager like that who might have said that to you?
Oh gosh, I couldn't hide that, could I? And I think that's a really common misperception, right? That, everything's available online. Everybody's globally connected. We're all remote. Netflix is fantastic. We can see movies and television from other countries. Therefore, we understand. So, is there one easy antidote to that? No. Lauren, you said that well too. I wish there was. But actually going back to your comments, Lauren, it really is instilling that sense of curiosity, that learner mindset. One of the many reasons I love the field that I'm in and this work with people, with humans, is we're never going to know everything there is to know about ourselves, let alone anybody else. So being able to cultivate that learner mindset within your teams, having that a part of your company values, that we constantly need to improve, we constantly need to focus on our self-awareness, that's going to start building the foundation to build more of these critical skills, to build more cultural agility. For sure, the first step is acknowledging that there are some differences and there are some challenges. That's a really big hurdle to get to the first marker. And then from there, really start adding in small practices every day that can really impact the engagement of your team member. It can be as simple as reading the headlines for the person that you're about to talk to. What are some critical things taking place in their location? Acknowledging what that may be. That takes maybe 3 minutes to do that before you enter a call. But that person on the other line, it means so much to them. It shows them, to your example, Jerry, like, oh, they do care about me as a person, not just as a commodity that's producing another commodity. So those small actions, for sure, starting with awareness, but little actions modeled by team members and team leaders can really have a big impact. And the more that you're able to model that as a leader, your team members will start to model it as well. And then you really can see those behaviors start to grow throughout the organization. It doesn't have to be a big top-down, huge learning and development of learning event. It can start with small actions at the individual level within these global teams.
Your small actions comment reminded me of the other thing that Jerry said that I probably smiled big at that when he said, not just giving attention, but giving affection. We don't ever use that word in the workplace, but taking a moment to say, hey, I see you, I appreciate you, I care about you, not just because you're this job title or producing this outcome for the business, but because I care about you for who you are and that you're here. Like being able to do that's what it takes to really create that. I love that sort of the takeaway there. So speaking of making things human, one of the things that we see in the research consistently is that when we use the right kinds of technology, it can actually help us to make work a little more human, not less human, because it enables us to know people better, enables us to support them better, to really connect with them on a deeper level than just doing things on a more manual basis. So Lauren, this last big question is for you, and it's an easy softball question. Just kidding. This is a tough one for everybody out there listening in. What does that tech stack look like for managing and supporting a global workforce? What sort of tidbits and key components of that do you think are important? Again, the audience listening in is taking notes. They're hoping to hear some things from you here on what they should be thinking about. So what would you suggest to them?
Yeah, it's definitely not a softball question, but love the humor infused in it. So I think supporting the growth and scalability of a global workforce really requires some specific tools. And as we think about building that tech stack, it's really essential to have tools that support some key areas like recruitment. Jerry, you talked about recruitment quite a bit. Our HR team, our learning and development team, payroll. We talked a lot about communication, collaboration. Jerry talked about performance management and compliance, while enabling scalability and adaptability across these different time zones and regions that we work with. And I'd say an ideal tech stack will need flexibility, security, and capability to integrate with other tools to really streamline the process. So oftentimes we do see different teams working across different silos with different tools. So if there is that opportunity to use one or a smaller number, I think that will lead to more success. And remote recruitment software as well to really make informed decisions in some of the locations that you're hiring that you might not know as much about. And then additionally, I'd say a strong learning platform that really, as I spoke about earlier, enables our leaders and our employees to have access to the tools, the resources, and the skills that they need to be able to do their best work. So we have a pretty strong learning management system as well as an internal intranet that we built. And I think one of the key components to making that successful is the availability across all time zones. So I did speak about, the nanobite, the small bite-sized learning nuggets that we've been working to incorporate over the last year or two more frequently due to feedback that we've heard. But I think having, again, that accessibility, so we leverage, as I said, things like Aperian, LinkedIn Learning, Go Fluent, things that are all available on demand, which can help our recruiters to do their jobs more efficiently, better, faster. It can help our learners that maybe English isn't the first language, so they're able to log on to a system where they can do proficiency testing and receive feedback on the spot. So I think it's things like that that help us to become better individuals, to stay curious, and to want to thrive to do our best kind of work. And one other thing I will mention, as Jerry was speaking about with performance management, I think that's key as well. And providing folks with the ongoing feedback. So it's not that one time a year, but we really at Akamai promote ongoing feedback in one-on-one conversations, in team meetings. Rewards and recognition is really important as well as we think about our global workforce. So those are just a few things I'd note.
Goodness, trying to capture all that. I knew it was going to be hard for you to put all that together, Lauren. So kudos to you on that one. One connection I'll make in there, the research tells us that when we ask candidates, do you want to know about development opportunities, growth, training, those things you're mentioning there, during the hiring process, about 7 out of 10 of them say yes globally, but that goes to 9 out of 10 for places like Asia Pacific. And it's a little bit lower in places like Europe and EMEA. So it ebbs and flows around the world, but people generally want to know, hey, if I say yes to you, if I can work with you, what does the future look like? And how are you going to help grow me to be more valuable tomorrow than I was yesterday? And so they're thinking about those things. And if we're not thinking about that, communicating that as part of all these pieces we're talking about here today, we're missing a chance to really connect with them on a deeper level. So I'm going to go rapid fire really quickly through a couple of these closing pieces there, because we have just a few moments left in the webinar here. But this has been so incredible. I've taken my own notes on my end, listening to Lauren, listening to Addie, listening to Jerry share some of these key things across compliance, across cultures, and respecting people's differences and appreciating those differences and leveraging those differences to create better outcomes, across things like technology and how to weave those things together. So we're actually supporting everyone, not just bringing them on, but actually supporting them and enabling them to do even better work. So I've gotten so many good notes out of that. For those of you out there in the audience who've been listening in today, again, you're welcome to drop any comments in the chat, in the Q&A there if you'd like to. If you want to go deeper on this, if we've piqued your curiosity, we mentioned curiosity a couple of times today. If we've piqued your curiosity and you're wanting to go a little bit deeper, there's actually a tremendous companion report to this, the Global Workforce Management Playbook, that goes into some of these deeper insights. The panelists represented here have chimed in on that, so you'll get some additional input from them and some other ideas as well for how to think through some of the things that were discussed in the conversation today. And there's a third webinar in this series. There's another one coming up. It's going to dive into how to pay a global workforce and pay a global team. So how to make sure that you're supporting those people at that level and ensuring that their work is fairly compensated and they are seen and heard and appreciated on that front. So I'm going to go into a poll we have here for you. So we're going to pull that one up and share that out, let you chime in, and let's hear what you have to say on this. So what is your biggest challenge when it comes to managing a global team? Is it communication across the time zones, which we heard about today in some of the conversation? Is it maintaining this unified company culture that's respecting those different areas, but this company culture where our values are values globally? Is it compliance, legal, making sure that we're taking care of the bases there so we're not caught unawares by something on the compliance front? Or maybe it's all the above. It's D, and we're just capturing all these, because all of these are big challenges. So we'll give you just a moment to chime in there on the poll and respond. But as we've heard from each of these different leaders, these different panelists today on these issues, each of them can be and are right now blockers, barriers, challenges to face. That doesn't make them insurmountable. That doesn't mean we shouldn't try. It just means we have to know the problem really well so we can address it. So thank y'all for chiming in there on that poll, and for responding, for letting us hear your voice and letting your voice be heard, essentially. So again, a quick thank you again to my amazing panelists, to the Multiplier team, for pulling this together, and for all of you for taking the time to spend with us today. I want to encourage you to continue this conversation. If you learned something today that you think is especially important, or a great takeaway you've heard from one of these great panelists, you can use the hashtag Beyond Borders, all one word, hashtag Beyond Borders, posting about this on social media so others can follow along and see the conversation and hopefully learn something from you that you're paying forward out there into the community, something that you've taken away. That's a great idea. So thank you to all of you for the good work you're doing, supporting your own global workforces, hiring them, paying them, managing them, onboarding, respecting and appreciating them, as we've heard in the conversation today. So many good things have come out of this, and I appreciate each of you, again, from panelists, for joining us. Thank you all. Okay, as we're wrapping up here, I want to do a quick rapid fire for each of you. I'm going to start with you, Addie. 1 minute or less. What was your big takeaway, your big recommendation for the audience that you want them to walk away with from the session today?
Yeah, thanks, Ben. And thanks so much, Jerry and Lauren, too, for all your advice today. That change can start small. I know it's overwhelming managing a global workforce. If you're just entering into this space or have been here for a while, it's hard work that doesn't take place overnight. So start small, start with small actions, start with your teams to see that impact. And the second piece would be making sure you're really grounded in your values. So your global teams have that foundation, and you have a framework, you have a language in which to talk about cultural agility and cultural differences. That's a safe space to come back to and have that shared language.
Awesome. Thank you, Addie. Lauren, you're up next. 1 minute or less. What's your big takeaway for today?
Love it, Addie. And thanks so much again for the conversation today. As said already, I would say be curious, communicate, 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 and don't assume that you know things. That can be a detriment. So ask questions, even if you think you know the answer. Ask questions. I think that will lead to, fostering better communications, leading to innovation, allow time for brainstorming and, space in team meetings to be able to share some best practices and tips and tricks, because that will lead to a thriving environment, rather than being behind the curve. So I'd say be curious, communicate, and don't assume that you know everything. And don't be afraid to ask questions.
Excellent. And last but not least, Jerry, close us out. What's your final takeaway?
And thank you. I'm not sure I have enough and adequate after, Addie and Lauren have spoken, but it was lovely to actually see that irrespective of how advanced organizations have become, irrespective of how complicated these global economic ecosystems have become, people continue to be the pivot around which, this entire ecosystem is built. I love it. Like Akamai and Addie, yours, like Ben, and the examples that we gave, right? It is so nice to know that all of us are thinking about investing in people that minutest individual collectively who create an organization.
Yeah, the thing we cannot forget as HR leaders is that behind every employee number is not just an employee and a job title, and not just a pay rate, but it's a person's hopes, their dreams, their family's future. All those things are wrapped together, and we have the privilege and the responsibility of impacting that in a positive way. Thank you. So many good things have come out of this, and I appreciate each of you, again, from panelists, for joining us. Thank you all, and we'll catch you again next time.